Julia James was the heart of Hazelwood, a talented artist whose vibrant paintings reflected the charm of the village she called home. Peter Shaw was its quiet postmaster, a man known for his politeness and unassuming demeanor. But when Julia's lifeless body was discovered in Blackwood Forest, brutally murdered, the seemingly ordinary lives of these two individuals collided in a chilling tale of obsession, betrayal, and violence that would forever haunt the village. The peaceful village of Hazelwood had always been a picture perfect place, nestled amidst rolling hills and ancient woodlands. With its cobblestone streets and quaint cottages, life in Hazelwood moved at a tranquil pace, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Crime was a rarity, limited to the occasional act of petty theft or a harmless dispute over property lines. For the residents, the sense of safety was a given, an unspoken assurance that their lives would remain undisturbed. But on the morning of May 12th, that fragile serenity was irreparably shattered. It was a dog walker who made the grisly discovery. While navigating a familiar path through Blackwood Forest, a dense and quiet area near the village, he stumbled upon something that froze him in his tracks. Lying motionless on the ground, half hidden by a tangle of brambles, was the body of Julia James. The scene was haunting. Julia, a 34-year-old local artist, had suffered brutal injuries that left no doubt her death was intentional. The dog walker, shaken but composed enough to act, called the police. Within an hour, the once quiet woods were swarming with officers, forensic teams, and curious onlookers kept at bay by hastily erected barriers. Julia had been a beloved figure in the village. Known for her warm personality and immense artistic talent, she often hosted community workshops and showcased her work at the local gallery. Her paintings, inspired by the beauty of Hazelwood's landscapes, had earned her admiration far beyond the village's boundaries. For someone so cherished, to meet such a violent end was unthinkable, and the shock of her death rippled through Hazelwood like an earthquake. As news of the murder spread, questions began to dominate conversations across the village. Who could have done this? Why Julia? Theories ranged from the plausible to the far-fetched. Some speculated that a stranger might have passed through and targeted her at random. Others whispered about the possibility of a jealous rival or a spurned lover. Rumors flourished in the absence of answers, feeding the growing unease among the villagers. The investigation began swiftly. The woods where Julia was found became the focal point, with officers scouring the area for evidence. Every inch of the ground was examined, every possible witness interviewed. Detectives discovered that Julia's phone was missing, an odd detail that hinted at robbery but didn't quite fit. Her home, a charming studio on the edge of the village, also yielded curious clues. While nothing valuable seemed to be stolen, the place had been disturbed as if someone had searched for something specific. Forensic analysis revealed that Julia had likely been killed during the early morning hours. She had left her house the previous evening, presumably for her routine walk, but never returned. The path she chose that day was one she had walked countless times before, a route she considered safe. That familiarity made her death all the more chilling. As the days passed, the initial shock turned into a gnawing fear. Hazelwood's residents, who had once left their doors unlocked without a second thought, now double-checked locks and avoided the woods entirely. The police worked tirelessly, but answers remained elusive. The idyllic village had become the backdrop for a nightmare, and the shadow of Julia's murder loomed large over everyone. In Hazelwood, life would never be the same again. As the police delved into Julia James's life, they began uncovering details that suggested her world wasn't as idyllic as it seemed. On the surface, Julia had been a bright, kind, and talented artist whose life revolved around her craft and her community. But beneath her cheerful exterior, she had been quietly grappling with turmoil, much of it centered around her relationship with Marcus Reed. Marcus was a local handyman who had moved to Hazelwood a few years earlier. Initially charming and hardworking, he had quickly gained the trust of the community, offering his services to repair everything from leaky roofs to broken fences. It wasn't long before Julia and Marcus became romantically involved, a relationship that many in the village initially thought was a perfect match. However, as time went on, cracks began to appear. Friends and neighbors recalled hearing arguments between the couple. Julia had confided in a close friend that Marcus had a temper that could flare up unpredictably. While there were no public incidents of violence, Julia had expressed feeling uneasy in the weeks leading up to her death. It was revealed that she had recently ended the relationship, citing Marcus's controlling behavior and his inability to handle her independence. Marcus's name quickly rose to the top of the police's list of persons of interest. Detectives brought him in for questioning, hoping to piece together his movements on the day of Julia's murder. Marcus was cooperative but defensive, claiming he had been working on a house renovation in a nearby village that morning. However, when police followed up on his alibi, they found it difficult to verify. The homeowner he claimed to be working for was away during that time, leaving no witnesses to corroborate his story. Further digging into Marcus's background revealed troubling signs. He had a history of minor offenses, including public altercations and a restraining order filed by a former partner. While none of these incidents directly implicated him in Julia's murder, they painted a picture of a man with a volatile nature. Police also learned that Julia had been planning to file a restraining order against Marcus shortly before her death, a step she hadn't taken yet. The investigation intensified as detectives searched Marcus's home and workshop. They found no physical evidence tying him to the crime scene, but the lack of an alibi and his contentious relationship with Julia made him the primary suspect. Villagers began whispering about Marcus, their initial admiration for the handyman turning into suspicion. He became an outcast almost overnight, with many assuming his guilt despite the lack of concrete proof. However, not everyone was convinced Marcus was the culprit. Some villagers believed he was being unfairly targeted due to his past and his visible arguments with Julia. Others felt the real killer was still at large, hiding in plain sight. For the police, Marcus's guilt or innocence hung in the balance, but with no physical evidence to anchor their suspicions, the case began to stall. Julia's murder became a haunting presence in the community, with everyone wondering if the answer lay in the troubled relationship she had left behind, or if the truth was something far more sinister. Just as the investigation seemed to be losing momentum, an unexpected lead emerged that breathed new life into the case. A local cyclist, who often rode through the trails near Blackwood Forest, came forward with a startling observation. On the morning of Julia James's murder, he had seen a man running out of the woods. The man's disheveled appearance and hurried movements struck him as unusual, but at the time, he didn't think much of it. It was only after hearing about Julia's murder that he realized the potential significance of what he had witnessed. The cyclist provided a description to the police, but the man he described did not match Marcus Reed. Instead, the description pointed to someone entirely different, a transient named Alan Cooper. Alan was known in the area for drifting between towns and occasionally taking odd jobs. He had no fixed address, but had recently been seen staying in an abandoned cabin on the outskirts of Hazelwood. Alan's reputation was far from clean. He had a history of petty theft and public disturbances, which made him a familiar face to the local authorities. He was known for being erratic, with a volatile temper and a tendency to clash with others. When investigators learned he had been seen in Hazelwood on the day of the murder, their interest in him grew. A search of the abandoned cabin where Alan had been staying turned up a chilling discovery: a blood-stained jacket hidden beneath the floorboards. The jacket's presence raised immediate suspicions, and the police sent it for forensic testing. At the same time, they tracked down Alan and brought him in for questioning. Alan denied any involvement in Julia's murder, claiming he had been out of the area that morning. He insisted the jacket wasn't his and accused the police of targeting him because of his past. However, his lack of a clear alibi and the discovery of the jacket painted a damning picture. For many in the village, it was enough to brand him guilty. But as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies began to emerge. The blood on the jacket matched Julia's, but forensic experts noted that the pattern of the stains suggested it had been wiped rather than splattered, an odd detail for someone who had allegedly been at the crime scene. Alan's behavior during questioning was erratic, but his repeated claims of being framed couldn't be entirely dismissed. Despite these doubts, the pressure to deliver results was mounting. Julia's murder had become a national story, and the public was eager for justice. With no other suspects in sight, the police charged Allen with the crime. The decision was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as a step toward closure, while others worried that the real killer might still be out there. Allen's arrest brought a temporary sense of relief to Hazelwood, but it was tinged with unease. The circumstances surrounding Julia's death still didn't fully add up. For some, the nagging question remained: had the police really found their culprit, or was the truth still waiting to be uncovered? As Allen Cooper sat in custody awaiting trial, doubts about his guilt continued to grow. While the blood-stained jacket seemed like compelling evidence at first, it left more questions than answers. The absence of direct physical evidence linking him to the crime scene, coupled with his repeated claims of being framed, cast a shadow over the investigation. Despite the official narrative, many in Hazelwood were not convinced Allen was the killer. For the detectives working the case, the feeling that something wasn't quite right lingered. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: a forensic re-examination of the crime scene. In their initial sweep, investigators had focused on obvious clues, but a routine review of collected evidence revealed a small, overlooked item. Hidden among the undergrowth near Julia's body was a fragment of a keychain. It was simple and unremarkable, yet distinctive enough to warrant further investigation. Detectives traced the keychain fragment to a local shop where it had been part of a limited edition set sold only in Hazelwood. After cross-referencing sales records, they narrowed down the list of purchasers. Among the names was someone entirely unexpected: Peter Shaw, Hazelwood's mild-mannered postmaster. Peter Shaw was an unassuming figure, known throughout the village for his polite demeanor and dedication to his job. He had worked at the post office for over a decade, earning the trust and respect of the community. No one could imagine Peter being involved in anything criminal, let alone a brutal murder. But the discovery of the keychain fragment linked him to the crime scene, raising immediate suspicion. The police began looking into Peter's background and movements on the day of Julia's death. At first glance, he appeared to have an alibi. He claimed to have been working at the post office all morning. However, surveillance footage from a shop near the woods painted a different story. Peter had been seen walking toward Blackwood Forest shortly before the estimated time of Julia's murder. Confronted with this evidence, Peter's facade began to crumble. Further investigation revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior. Peter had developed an unhealthy obsession with Julia, frequently finding excuses to visit her home under the guise of delivering packages or asking about community events. In private, he had become fixated on her, misinterpreting her kindness as something deeper. Under pressure, Peter eventually confessed. On the morning of May 12th, he had followed Julia into the woods, intending to confront her about his feelings. When she rejected him, his emotions spiraled out of control, and in a fit of rage, he attacked her. After the murder, he attempted to stage the scene as a robbery, taking her phone and ransacking her studio to divert suspicion. The blood-stained jacket found in Allen Cooper's cabin had been planted by Peter in a calculated effort to frame him. Peter Shaw's confession stunned the village. The unassuming postmaster, who had been a trusted member of the community, was revealed as the killer. For Hazelwood, the revelation was both shocking and deeply unsettling. The true face of evil had been hiding in plain sight all along. Peter Shaw's confession sent shockwaves through the village of Hazelwood. For weeks, the community had been grappling with fear and suspicion, unable to believe that one of their own could be responsible for Julia James's brutal murder. The revelation that Peter, the unassuming and trusted postmaster, was the killer shattered the fragile sense of security that had defined life in the village. The trial that followed was swift but harrowing. Peter's confession, combined with the physical evidence linking him to the crime scene, left little room for doubt about his guilt. The prosecution laid out a chilling timeline of events, detailing how Peter's obsession with Julia had spiraled into violence. Witnesses testified about his increasingly erratic behavior in the months leading up to the murder, including his frequent and unsolicited visits to Julia's home. Forensic experts explained how Peter had meticulously planned to divert suspicion. His decision to plant evidence in Alan Cooper's cabin was particularly damning. It was a calculated move that demonstrated not only a desire to evade capture, but also a willingness to let an innocent man take the fall. Allen, who had been wrongfully accused and endured weeks in custody, was present in court to hear Peter's admission of guilt. The injustice he had suffered became a stark reminder of how easily the truth could have been obscured. When the guilty verdict was announced, there was no celebration, only a collective sense of relief and profound sadness. Peter Shaw was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge described his actions as a betrayal of trust, highlighting the devastating impact his crime had on both Julia's family and the wider community. In the weeks and months that followed, Hazelwood struggled to heal. The picturesque village, once a symbol of peace and simplicity, now bore the weight of a dark chapter in its history. Residents who had once left their doors unlocked and exchanged smiles with every passerby now viewed each other with a measure of caution. The realization that evil could lurk behind the most familiar faces had left a permanent mark. Julia James's family worked tirelessly to honor her memory. Her parents, devastated by their loss, created a foundation in her name to support young artists and raise awareness about stalking and obsessive behaviors. They hoped that sharing Julia's story could prevent similar tragedies and encourage people to recognize the warning signs of dangerous relationships. Alan Cooper, though exonerated, found it difficult to move on from the ordeal. The false accusations and time spent in custody had left deep scars, both emotional and social. Despite the village's collective apology, he decided to leave Hazelwood and start fresh in a new town, far from the shadows of the past. For Hazelwood, life eventually found a semblance of normalcy, but it was a new kind of normal. The village had changed, its innocence forever lost. Julia's art, which once brought joy to so many, now served as a poignant reminder of her life and the tragedy that had taken it away. Her murder would remain a cautionary tale, a chilling example of how darkness can hide in the most unexpected places.